Hi, I'm Carol Jansen, and I'm in the Northwest region, Northwest Washington chapter, and I've been part of Red Cross for 18 years now, I think. I'm the Mass Care regional lead and our chapter lead. And so I'm going to go over shelter forms with you today. So, my slide go forward. So all the shelter forms are found on the exchange in the toolkit. And with that, you want to, when they have the list of the forms here, you can see it says required. And those forms are all required. I'm going to add two forms that I didn't put in the slide that aren't in the required here, but they are a doctrine because I'm a reunification person also. And I really highly recommend having the registration for it's right now it says Safe and Well. It's going to change the name to reunification registration form because we'll be using the helper tool instead of the Safe and Well. And also some emergency welfare forms in there in case some of your clients are looking for somebody for your reunification people. But these are the forms here that are required to have in all shelter kits. So all the forms, and I'm just showing the directions on one, but all the forms have directions on how to use them at the front. And so they'll have step by step on most of them exactly how to fill out each form. And then each form also, after the directions, they have a one of the forms and it has everything highlighted on what goes in every space. Now in my shelter kits, instead of wasting paper, we're all conscious of that. I do not put the directions and this page on every form. What I do is I have a guidebook in my shelter kit and I put the directions there so that everyone can read the directions, but we're not paying and wasting paper to put 2, 3, or 4 extra pages on every form. This is the shelter registration form to start with. So the person name at the top, if you can see my arrow here, is the head of household. And so we usually only put their name there. We'll put the rest of the household, and the household does not have to be a typical family. It's anybody who lives together in that housing. So it could be a couple that are married or a married couple. It could be two families that are sharing a household, or a grandma or an aunt or uncle or a roommate situation. Those would be your household. So we want to make sure we fill the dormitory registration out for the client if all possible. Every once in a while, if it's really a long line of clients, to make it go faster, we may have them fill it out and we just go over it with them. But it's easier if we just fill them out ourselves. That way we know they're legible and we can read them. And so it's very important to get the pre-disaster address on the forms because we want to actually make sure that they are part of the disaster. And it also helps when we know evacuations are lifted, what area they lived in, so that they can go back to it. But we want to make sure we get everything on the form. And this is just the top half. So this is the bottom half of the form. And this is where you put each member of the household in there. And then when they depart, one of the things that a lot of times happens is we don't put the departure date. It's important to put that in so that we know who's no longer. And when I do my shelter notebook, what I do is I put 2 sections, one for the current clients, and then when I know they're not coming back, I'll move them to the second section so we can keep track of who actually is still staying in the shelter. And then putting the cot number is important. And what I do in the dormitory is I use blue tape, and I'll put a number on the floor with the cot number, and then I'll have it there. And that way, if somebody is looking, another Red Crosser needs to talk to a client, or there's somebody that we need to get a client, it's easier to find the client if we know where they're at. The questions on the bottom are really important. Someone in the household is required to register with state or local government. We use that if they say yes to it. There's multiple reasons, some positive, some negative. One is if they're on probation and they have that, sex offenders and stuff. The other questions on that could be as easily as being a foster parent. They have to report with the government if they have the child out of the household in a different area. One of the times that it was really positive was at the Oso mudslide, where we had a part of a mountain collapse over a neighborhood. And we actually had someone who answered yes to that. And after talking to him, found out that he had answered yes because he was in the Navy and he heard, and his parents lived up in Oso, and he went AWOL. And so because he answered yes to that, we were actually able to get him to see the chaplains. We had a Navy chaplain there because we had several naval families involved, and we're able to get him okay to be here. Another part of that is the veteran or military, and that's just because there are services that and especially when casework comes in, that we can get for the military people that may be available for them. And then I agree to share information with other agencies. I usually have to explain that to clients because they think you may be breaking their confidentiality, sharing with the government their information. So I let them know that what we need that for is to get them more help from other agencies. It's not to report them or anything, but it is to get their other help. And I'm going to go back one because I forgot at the very top here. Well, actually I went forward, but this is the Spanish version. It comes both in English and Spanish. When I print mine back to back, so I don't waste paper. But I'm going to go back to the beginning because I forgot to go over the observation. So we observe the client, and I'll give you an example of one shelter I was at, and I was doing registration, and this client could barely look like she was ready to collapse. So instead of registering her, I pulled health services in immediately. I also was at another time where I had somebody who came in, they were very shaky and stuff. It was obviously that they needed help. So I was able to get them help right away. If someone needs immediate help, we're not going to fill out that registration form. We're going to get them the help they need and take care of the registration after health services or mental health or whatever has looked at them. The other questions we ask the client at the beginning: is there anyone in your household that needs something right away to stay in the shelter? So we want to make sure that there may be an immediate need, or is there somebody who needs something within 6 or 8 hours? Maybe their medication that they left without and they're okay now, but they need medication in a few hours. And so we want to make sure that we get them to health services, mental health, whatever they need, so that they can get it, but it's not where we have to drop everything and get them right away. And there's actually a form we use, I'll go over later, to keep track of that. This is the same form in Spanish. So this is the form that we use on those people that may have a need that doesn't have to be answered right away, but we want to make sure that we don't forget about them. And it's the shelter referral form. Now, if you're taking somebody to health services right then and there, you don't have to write their name on this, because the whole idea of this form is to get them the help they need. If you already got them the help they need, you don't need to do it. So it's just a way to keep track of them so we don't forget them. And then you just check the box over here on who, what service they need. So whether it's health services, mental health, spiritual care, or the manager. And an example of the manager is anything that you're not sure of. With the registration form, I should have said this, that if someone does say they have to report, you go get the shelter manager right then and there. Don't treat the person any differently. We want to respect them no matter what reason they said yes. We want to give them respect, but you want to get the shelter manager involved to see if the person is safe to be in the shelter. Like if it was a sex offender, we have sex offenders in our shelters. But if it's a sex offender against children, we may not want them to be in a shelter with a lot of kids. So we may want to make other arrangements for them. So it just depends on, you don't have to worry about making that decision. As if I'm the shelter site manager, I'm going to bring it to headquarters. So that you know on that. So this is the shelter log. And there are 2 shelter logs. That's why it says general at the top and the manager. The general log is what everybody from the shelter team can write in. And I always encourage everyone to write more, to overwrite rather than underwrite. When you come on shift, you can read what happened during the previous shift. So everybody can read what's going on from that. And sometimes you might forget when the shift when you change shifts, to give the information to the next shift. And this way, if it's logged, when they go and read it and you forgot to mention it, they have that information, and then they may just call you on it. The only thing that I don't want, or we don't want you to overdo, is if it's a mental health or health thing. If so, like you have to call 911 for an emergency, you just put in the general log, you put that 911 was called for a client. They took them to the hospital, and don't put their name in that because of HIPAA. We want to protect their health thing. But in the manager log, the manager might put that information because the manager log is more confidential just for the shelter manager. Also in the shelter manager log, it's a good thing for if you're the shelter manager to write positive things that maybe your staff did that you might forget. So when you do their evals, or if you're having a problem with staff, or if there's an incident that needs to stay more private, that'll go in the manager log. Are there any questions so far on any of this? I can't see the hands raised or anything.
Carol, I just wanted to touch real quick that. Thank you, Carol. Let me mute you real quick. Okay, here we go. So we did have a question. Someone mentioned, is this a new form for the registration? So this is not a new form for the registration. That form we've been using that form since 2016. I know that some of us already heard there's a new form coming out. We were told that we shouldn't be the messengers on this. And so there is a new form that some of us have seen the draft of the new form for the registration. We do not know what the final version is going to be. And we also don't know when that's going to be released. It might be released in August. It might be released in the next level 6. It might be released next year. We don't know. So again, I'm just going to remind everyone that to be flexible, all the data that's shared, all the forms that be shared today, it's going to be as current of today, not going to be tomorrow. So what happens if you have a change? Like Carol mentioned earlier, go on Volunteer Connection, and whatever that you see on there and Volunteer Connection, go to Exchange. Those are the most up-to-date forms. I did see a hand earlier. I think was it Dave or David? Do you still have the question? Or would you like to type in the chat? Okay, Carol, I think we can move forward.
And also in the Exchange, they have the date of when the form came. So I'll go through every once in a while and check, because They do update the forms. They also, so you know, as they're doing the streamlining, they may be taking some of the forms we have out. We don't know what that's going to look like. One of the things is, as she said, is always be flexible. Okay. Computer doesn't want to go to the next slide. Again, I don't know what's going on here. Let me try backtracking. It's stuck. Oh, there we go. Okay, the daily shelter report. So the daily shelter report has a lot of reasons behind it. And so it's really important to fill this out every day. And it should be completed by after lunch. The reason why I say after lunch is the way we keep track of meals is it starts with dinner, then it's breakfast, then it's lunch. So you should have everything done on lunch. After lunch, the whole form should be filled out. This form is really helpful for headquarters, and usually your shelter manager will put somebody in charge to make sure they get all the information on it. This information goes to several different systems at headquarters that they're tracking on. A few things on here. Number one, the shelter population divided by age groups. At the last year, we no longer had to do that. We'll see this year what they're doing, but they no longer required us to break it down by age, which made it a lot easier. The positions and names of the supervisors at the IAP, the incident action plan that everybody gets, they take that information from the shelter manager from this form to make sure that it matches what goes in the IAP, because we want to have the name of who to call. If health services wants to call the shelter, they'll have the name and the phone number of the shelter manager or the night supervisor, or if somebody else needs to get a hold of you, reunification's calling or something. So that's really important. This is the top of the form. I divided it again, but because I couldn't fit it all in. And it's nice to know who your is. It also has an area where you're putting how many people you have on the day shift and how many people you have at the night shift. And so it helps with that. And the names may change, not just when someone goes home and a new person, but if somebody has the day off. We want, usually in the IP, if they know that someone's in the position just for a day off, they'll usually put the for today only. It's up to whoever does the planning. The things that I wanted to mention here, the blankets and cots and all of that is really important. One of the things, there's two things that aren't on here that you have to add, and that's because this form, it was developed in 2018, and there's a couple of counts that they need that are not on here. So in those blank two spaces, if you have it, write medical cots, because they do count the medical cots separate from the regular cots. The other thing that's not on here that we're seeing, that we didn't used to see, but we see now a lot of, is the outside population. We're seeing more and more people that'll bring their RVs to the shelter so they have use of the shelter, but they don't want to sleep in a congregate shelter, so they'll just sleep in their own RV or even set up a tent in the parking lot. And every once in a while, you'll get somebody who prefers to sleep in their car outside. And there is on the exchange, there is a form that calculates, it's like 2.5 people per car or RV, because we're not going to do an exact count on the people outside. We just want to, for headquarters to know how many people we're serving. It's just an average count. Okay, so this is the disaster request form. So if you need anything, it needs to go on here. Even if you happen to, you need something right away, like you have a baby show up and you need to get them formula or diapers, and you don't have a couple of days to wait for logistics to get that for you, and you use your mass care permit card or purchasing card to get them, you still need to fill out the 6409, because we need to keep track of everything. If you need more and you want to, for when you're ordering supplies, we want to keep track of them, not wait till you're out, because logistics may take a couple of days to fill your orders. So we want to get those orders in as soon as we know we have a need, whether it is for more cots or blankets, comfort kits, or whether it's you need diapers, or if you're snacks for the shelter. We want to do that all ahead. The mass care cards that we have to purchase things at the shelter are only supposed to be used on things that we need right away. We don't want the everyday things. We want everything to go through logistics. But this form is actually even filled out when we open a shelter, when we close the shelter. It is everything logistics. If you're at headquarters and your supervisor is getting you a car for 3 or 4 people to share, one of these has to be filled out before you're going to get the vehicle to use. So everything has to have one of these forms filled out. This is the bottom half of it. On the bottom half, you can put directions on here and stuff. I'm going to go back for here a minute. When you're doing the quantity, this is where people get messed up. Is the quantity is how many you need. So if you're going to buy something by a case, it's going to be 1 case. And then in here, it's going to be a case of 12. So the total items would be 12. If you're going to buy, and you want to make sure you give enough information that logistics knows what you want. So like if you're going to need water bottles, you just don't put you need 24 water bottles. You want to put individual water bottles, because otherwise you might end up with 24-gallon water bottles. So you want to give them enough information so they know what they want, but yet you also want to give them enough leeway so that they can get it. So like for cereal, you might put sweet or healthy, so that they know to get some Cheerios or cornflakes, or to get some kids cereal with sugar on it. For snacks, we usually put sweet or salty. So sweet would be cookies, and salty could be chips or nuts or things like that. So that way they have flexibility. So you, as I said, unless you need an exact same thing, you want to make sure you put that exact same thing. And then at the bottom with the special instructions, you can put it. This is easiest done if you have a computer on the internet, on the computer now, because you can just attach it to an email and send it into them. But all the kits have paper forms too, in case you're somewhere where you don't have internet. I had a shelter up in Washington this year that we had no internet service. We were at a church and they did not have Wi-Fi that they were willing to share with us, and we had no internet, so we did everything on paper. So it's important to do it that way. And then if you are going to print, if you do it on a computer, but you can't email it and you're going to print it, you just print page 1,3, and it'll get the 2 pages they need back to back. This form is filled out when we get a donation of something. And this one is used, this is not for the unsolicited donations when people bring in clothes and things that you don't need, but this is for donations of things that we would be purchasing. And you will put the form that the purchasing form, you will put the 2 together. So and on the purchasing, you'll say that that you already received it, so they won't be getting it for you again. It's really important to fill these forms out for logistics for a few reasons. One is usually logistics will give a thank you note to whoever the donor is, and they will send them something for their taxes on it that they made a donation. So if somebody comes in with 10 cases of water, they want to know about it. And it also, the other thing is it also shows that something was donated. An example was I had one shelter that had 70 clients in it from an apartment fire, but we had all our meals donated from the community. The community came out and bought, did all the restaurants in town donated. We got all these snacks donated. We didn't have to buy any snacks. We had somebody bring to the shelter cases of water. And the next shelter I ran had only 12 clients in it, but we had no donations. Well, when they're doing the books, they're going to say, how come you spent so much more money on food for 12 people than you did for 70? Well, they can say, well, it's because the larger one was had a lot of donations, so we didn't have to purchase it. So there's a lot of good reasons why this form is filled in. One of the things that it's hard to ask when someone makes a donation, but it's really important if they will, is what is your donation value? So that can upset the book or when they're doing the books. And you are going to get people who just want to donate and they don't want to fill out help have the form filled out or anything. So then just fill it out the best you can. So at least the logistics knows what got donated.
Carol, before we proceed, we have several questions.
Okay.
Valerie, would you like to go first? I know now your hand is down. You're able to unmute, Valerie, if you're still with us.
Thank you. My question was answered.
Great, thank you. And Rosemary, your hand is up. Rosemary, you're able to unmute. Okay, if you cannot unmute, you can type your question in the chat. And something that I just want to touch briefly is that the goal is really for us, I mean, the 6409s really shouldn't be filled out in the field level, but this is basically to provide you with exposure to see what needs to be done, what forms needs to be done and filled out. And I do know that some of us that also heard upcoming changes regarding 6409 and the way that we're going to do it. So just a gentle reminder again, everything that's said today is going to be active or up to date as of today. And when you have future disaster, just keep in mind to be flexible. Thank you so much, Carol. You can move forward.
Okay, so this form is the shelter shift inspection, and it's important so that we know we're checking for damage. We're checking for to make sure that there is one of the things that that the emergency exits are safe, that we didn't block and put a whole bunch of stuff in front of the emergency exit. And so it's supposed to be done on every shift. I'll be honest, I'm good if I get it done once a day. But it should be done on every shift. And we want to find out about damage if we notice that there's damage that wasn't there the day before and there's damage that day. There's nothing like doing when we're turning the facility back to the owner, the church or the school or whatever, and they're doing the walkthrough post sheltering, and the facility people notice something damaged. We want to know about it ahead of time. We want to be able to bring that to them, let logistics know and facilities know that there was a hole punched in the wall by accidentally, or that don't ever use anything but painter's tape to hang up signs, but somebody hung up a sign and when you took it down, it took the paint off the wall. so we want to know where that damage is ahead of time, and we also want to make sure that the shelter is safe for the clients that we're keeping everything safe. So it's an important form, and it should be done on every shift, but I'm honest, I'm not always good. I usually have the night shift to it because they have usually more time, but there's certain things that they can't see at night when the lights are down, so it needs to be done every shift. Okay, unaccompanied minor, and I have never had an unaccompanied minor in my 18 years. But if there was an unaccompanied minor, number one, if you're at registration, excuse me, you need to get your manager right away. Because there are some rules to keep the unaccompanied minor safe, which is mainly we try to keep them in a separate area, and we should have 2 staff with them, which also means that if you're short staffed, the manager needs to get to headquarters to get somebody, to get more staff brought in. So, but this is a form you fill out, and then the unaccompanied minor will go to actually reunification, will work with the unaccompanied minors to get in touch with child welfare or the local police department on the child that doesn't have a parent. Just a side note, if you have an unaccompanied minor and the parent comes and says, my kid's here, do not release that child without going through Child Protective Services or law enforcement to that parent, even if it is their parent, because you don't know if they're not the custodian parent or not. So even though it's their parent, make sure that we're keeping that child safe until Child Protective Services tells us we can release them.
Carol,
Shelter
before you
client
go
disclosure.
on- Carol,
What?
before you go on, we have a question.
Yes.
Dave, would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, this is pertaining to the shelter inspection. I'm in logistics and I've been doing it for a while, setting up shelters and everything. And I'm usually a lot of times I'm the first one that pulls in. Been informed that logistics can take that form initially and do the opening inspection. And so that way it'll expedite opening the shelter when the manager shows up and everything. I just want to clarify, verify if that's true.
Yes, that's true, and I have that later on, the
Oh, okay.
opening
I'm
and
sorry.
closing form. No, that's fine, because they're very similar things. The opening and closing form is different from the shelter shift inspection. The shelter
Okay.
shift inspection is to check for damage that might happen after that other form is filled out.
Oh, I understand. Okay. I kind of jumped the gun there. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Well, you didn't know, so that's fine. So this form here now is the shelter client disclosing tracking form. And I haven't had to ever use one, but it's an important form if you need it. And basically what this form is used if you're breaking confidentiality on something. We want to make sure it's documented really well. And so like you need to talk to about a client to something that to a health services, or you need to talk and the client hasn't given you permission, or to law enforcement if someone or it's so it's only used in extreme things because we're usually not going to share any client information with anybody without getting the client's permission. But there are, and I have not come across a case, but there could be a case where we need to break their confidentiality and share information without the client's approval. And so if you would have to get in that situation, and obviously it's all going to be done through your shelter manager on all of this, it's not as an SA, we're going over so you understand the forms and see them, but everything you have a manager, there's always somebody above you. And if you're the shelter site manager, you're going to go to the shelter lead at headquarters, and the shelter lead at headquarters might bring it up to mass care or AD of ops. there's always somebody above. So don't ever feel like, oh, I'm all confused. There's all this stuff to do and I don't know how to handle it. But I've never had to use one of these forms, but it's there in case there is a case where confidentiality has to be broken. So this is a newer form that came out, and it is for if we have an area where we're keeping clients' possessions safe. And it's a form that they fill out for their storage of their things. It is a really good idea to be able to have an area because clients, you know, they only, a lot of times what they have that they bring into the shelter is all they might have left after their house burnt or was hit by a tornado or whatever. They may only have what they brought and stuff, and when they leave, we let them know that we're not responsible, you know, for their belongings that they leave in their cots. But if you can have a secure area where you can secure clients' belongings and stuff that they can leave them, they fill out this form. Okay, for client sign in, every client, when they come and they go, need to sign in and out. It's really important, and it's going to be the same with the staff and the visitor. If we would have to evacuate that shelter for some reason, we want to grab these sign-in sheets because we want to see, once you should have a meeting place outside the shelter where you've told the clients and the staff that if you have to evacuate, this is where we gather. And then you can make sure that everybody who is signed in at that shelter made it out. So it's really important to know who's in the shelter at all times. We wouldn't want to send the fire looking for somebody because we have 3 clients that we had signed in and they didn't leave. And so they're going to go looking for them when they either checked out 3 days ago and they didn't sign out the last time they left, or they went to go to the store or work or something and they didn't sign out when they left. So really encourage the clients, tell them the importance of making sure they sign in. And usually after the first or second day, you don't even have to ask them when they go by. They ask you for it. One of the things though that you want to do, I usually put these on a clipboard, is you want to cover them up with a piece of paper so that if somebody comes and they're looking for someone and that person might not want to be known that they're there, it keeps the confidentiality, because they could come up and talk to the registration person and there's a sign-in sheet and they just look and see that the person's there. So we want to cover that up so that it is the confidentiality is put. And there is a spot on these for their last day. So when they exit that, if they check that, then you know to move their registration form that they're no longer staying in. And that's another thing that also when you have client meetings that I emphasize at the client meetings, please let us know if you're leaving for the last time, so that we know. And then usually I'll also ask them, we'll put their cots on their side until we move them so that we know they're dirty cots. This form also comes in Spanish, so this is the client one. And this is the form that, I can't remember your name, sorry, was talking about the opening and closing form. Hopefully that this form, we don't have to, as shelter workers, have to fill out. Hopefully logistics facility people will go and do the walkthrough initially with the facility, and they will, it's quite a long form, and you're looking for damage because we want to note damage. And if you're doing this, it's a good idea to take a picture of any damage ahead of time that you notice, so that you have recording that. Because if the damage is there ahead of time, we don't want to be paying for it when we move out of that shelter. So this form is used for the walkthrough initially before you open the shelter, and then you walk through again when you close the shelter. Facilities usually does this, but I've been at shelters that are 3 hours from headquarters. And so they'll just ask the shelter workers team to do the walkthrough, or both, or maybe one or the other for the pre or the closure. So it's not a form that on a routine basis that we do on every shelter, but there are occasions where facilities will ask us to do the walkthroughs for them. So the difference between this one and the shift one is this is the beginning and the end, looking for damage and checking. The other thing is when you're walking through as the facility, they'll tell you, we don't want you to use this room, anybody to go in, or they may say staff can go use this room, but we don't want all the clients going in here and stuff. So it's the time to find out what part of the shelter we can use, building facilities we can use and what we can't use. Are there any more questions?
No questions?
So this is the shelter visitor sign-in. This is not for their friends that are visiting them, because as you know, if they have friends visiting them, they usually aren't going into the dormitory area, unless there are some facilities where it is where you might have the dormitory and the feeding area separate, so people can visit their friends there. But usually, if they're a friend, they're not allowed in the dormitory area. But this is for partners that may be coming in to help us. FEMA, if we have law enforcement come in, the press, if they show up, we have them sign in on this, and you already, or next time you're going to have the media, what we can and cannot do with the media. Usually they're not allowed in the shelter without pre-arrangements made, but this is a form so that we know who's in the shelter that's not staff and not clients that we keep track of. So any partners that are there for other, it may be like we had a shelter where we had a lot of Hispanic, and we had a neighborhood ministry that interpreted and were there all day long to interpret for us. And so they would sign in on this sheet. And this is the same sheet in Spanish. I thought I had the staff. Where I put the staff sheet? I thought I had the staff sign-in sheet, but it's similar to that, but it's for the staff. If I don't have it further on, I thought I had put that in. This form is mainly going to be filled out at headquarters, or it may be filled out by the shelter manager. And this form is basically when you need extra staff. So you may need staff to cover a day for days off. You might just have enough staff to cover your shifts and you don't have an extra person to cover days off. It may be people are going home, and it's really important to make sure you let the manager know when your last day is, and not your travel day is your last day, but your last work day in the shelter, so that they know when they need to get a replacement for you, because we don't want to wait till the last minute. Again, it takes 2 or 3 days to deploy new people in, so we want to request staff. It also is good for EBVs. We use the same form, event-based volunteers, for those who don't know. Those are people that aren't part of Red Cross, but there's a disaster in their, there's a disaster in their area and they want to help. And so the EBVs can sign up. They give them basic brief training. They sign confidentiality papers. They do a background check on them. And then they may work in your shelter or any other job that needs to be done with the Red Cross. And so this is the form that is used again. And remind, just because sometimes your shelter manager is just so busy, because that job is constantly on the go when you're shelter manager. It's my favorite job to do, but I'm always working overtime on that. So make sure that remind them, hey, you know, my last day's in 3 days. Have you gotten someone to replace me? And so that they make sure that they don't forget anyone. So the activity books you'll find on the exchange on the sheltering toolkit. They come in English and in Spanish, and they're pretty thick, and they're for kids. And I actually used them at the flooding in Southern Washington. We had a few children in the shelter, so I made a copy of them. In my shelter kits, I have made one master of both the English and the Spanish, and I have that in each kit. I have not made a whole bunch of copies because they're quite large, and not only would they take up the whole kit, but I don't want to use all the paper, and I had no problem. It's not something you need to have day one to give the kids. And like, we were at a school, so the school made copies for me, or you could ask headquarters that you need copies, or if you don't have a lot of shelter kits, because like in our chapter we have like 20. But if you don't have a lot of shelter kits, you could keep multiple copies in your shelter kit or in another box and have those all printed up at your chapter, so that when you have something, that logistics can bring you the activity books and they're already printed out. There's different ways of doing it. But they are really good for the kids to have the books so that they can it keeps them busy, it gives them something to do, and they're on disaster, so it kind of gives them a little comfort too and understanding. And that is all I have. So are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Carol. We have one question. Dorian is asking, which visitors need an escort besides the media?
It depends, and so that I would check because it depends on who they are. So our partners, we're not going to let them usually alone with a client, but if they're in the same area. I've been in, like, I've had shelters where we've had people come in and do schooling with the kids or do activities with the kids. Southern Baptists have done that and things. So usually, as long as they're in other organizations that we work with all the time and we know they're safe with the clients, we don't have to worry about escorting them as much. Anybody that isn't a regular partner or members of the community, we always are going to escort any politicians around, and obviously they're going to sign up on in the visitor one, and we're going to make sure that we also explain to them, you know, we always let the clients know if we're bringing somebody like that in ahead of time in case they don't want to speak to them, and we always want to make sure that whoever we bring in respects our clients and don't disturb them if they don't want to be disturbed. I don't know if that answer or not, because it depends on the person. The shelter manager would be making that decision for you. You would get your shelter manager.
Thank you so much, Carol. Alex pretty much said the same thing, government officials, and Hillary mentioned law enforcement. And we have a hand up. Michael, your hand is up.
Thank you. Actually, it's a request. Can we get back to page 1 where she shows the 15 required forms? I just want to take a quick picture of it.
And you will get the slide afterwards.
There you go. As I said,
Thank you.
Certification forms aren't on there. They really should be. They're in the doctrine, but they're not on the sheltering toolkit as required. We should have some of the new ones will be reunification registration. The old ones that we use until we got the new ones still say safe and well registration, and then the emergency welfare forms should be in there too, but they're not on this list.
So again, the slides will be sent out after this meeting, and the screenshot is taken directly from the whatchamacallit, from the exchange. So if you go to Sheltering Toolkit, you're able to find that. Jeff, you had your hand up earlier, but now your hand is down. Do you still have a question?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. I belong to a number of responding agencies, and one of the other agencies I belong to is called CDS, which stands for Children's Disaster Service. And I just want to take this opportunity to have a little bit of commercial that I know that, like you said, there's different levels within the organization, but if at any time you find overwhelmed by children, we are always ready to assist with that need. I hope that you are somewhat aware of that, or some of our colleagues.
And thank you. That is really nice. We want to make sure that whoever does partnership at your chapter and your region knows about them and stuff, because there are instances when we have a lot of children in our shelters, and we usually go to outside organizations. Like I know at one shelter in Texas, they had the Southern Baptist had a children's program. In Louisiana, when I was at a shelter, I'm not sure who did it, but they had a group that came in and did the children activities.
Yes, I had, excuse me for interrupting, but I had 2 occasions which I found it to be very helpful for the Red Cross. One was with the Hawaii lava flow, and we were right there in the FEMA center, and the other time was in Florida. So I've seen them in action, and I think it would be a great win-win situation. That's the end of my commercial.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments?
We don't have any more questions in the chat. We do have a comment from Hillary. Hillary said to make sure that the need is known to the headquarters so they can coordinate with external relations. The shelter staff shouldn't reach out directly to the partner agencies for assistance.
Right. And with the new emphasis on the shelter, one of the things that was told us was that we want to make sure that the needs are always being met at the shelters. So if you notice as an SA or a manager or a supervisor a need that we can help with, make sure we get that and it gets passed on, because headquarters can't take care of your needs if they're not aware of them.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Carol, for this wonderful presentation, and thank you all for coming on. I did not expect this many people. I expected much fewer people. I do see another hand up. We'll get to that in just a second. So just a reminder that, when we're talking about external relations are presenting to us next week. And again, it's not going to be Tuesday because she couldn't make it. It's going to be Thursday. It's June the 16th, Thursday at 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. It's the same link, same chat, same everything. Okay, now let's get to more questions. Lorraine, you had your hand up.
Yes, can you just real briefly explain the difference between the shelter daily report and the shelter log?
Yes. So the shelter log is where you're just recording anything that happens in the shelter. So you might even put in there, somebody came by and a restaurant and they donated lunch for us, or that there was a conflict between 2 clients, so that the next shift knows. The shelter daily report is mainly numbers and figures, like how many cots you have, how many meals you're serving. So headquarters it's more for headquarters, where the log is more for that shelter in particular. Plus it's a legal document if we ever had to go back with a problem that wouldn't be called for court. It's a legal document. But the shelter daily report is more giving headquarters an idea of what the shelter has, how many meals they're serving, how many clients they have, so that the feeding staff knows, oh, they're not serving as many people. We probably need to cut down how many meals we're ordering, or they're serving more people. We need to get more food there. It also keeps track of cots so they can see that you're getting low, even though your manager should put in a request when you're getting low for cots, but there's also a picture that they can see, oh, this shelter has 100 cots sitting in a trailer and they only have 20 clients. Well, we have another shelter that needs cots, so we can go take them from this shelter to that shelter. So it gives a picture to headquarters on what's going on, what you need, what your supplies are, where the log is what's happening at that shelter for the staff, and as a legal document, if there's something that you need to report, write down.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you so much. We're coming up to the hour. I do have a little, brings me up that I just thought of now. I do have a little homework for you. I'd like everyone to find out that what happens after a disaster relief operation. Where does all those forms, where do all the forms go? So the hint is it's going to be on Exchange, and the answer will be revealed in the next meeting on June the 16th with External Relations.